Oh, my boy, how we doing? It's been a while. Oh, you just benched? What are you benching nowadays? 315, not bad. I'm just kidding, I really don't care. I mean, somebody your size surely should have a monstrous overhead strict press to go with that big bench, right? Oh, you haven't tested it in 5 years. Well, okay, what do you think you could get? Okay, the last time you pressed, you were doing sets of 3 at 115 pounds. It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest. So in this video, we're going to break down, in my opinion, what is the king of upper body pushing exercises, the overhead strict press. The strict press earned its reputation as the king for a few different reasons. Number one, it's a full body exercise. It's the only upper body compound lift where the feet are on the ground, meaning you have to stabilize from the bottom up. A bench press, you have an entire bench to rest on. Yes, there's going to be some leg drive with a heavy bench press, but your whole torso is stabilized. With the military press, you have to create a lot of tension through the glutes, the quads, the midsection, the scapular stabilizers, the rotator cuffs, all to produce a strong and stable overhead press. Another reason I love the strict press is because there's nowhere to hide. It exposes all of your limitations in your upper body quickly. So if you have stiff shoulders, if you have a stiff thoracic spine, if you have a weak core, if you have weak scapular stabilizers and rotator cuff, your strict press is going to suffer, and it's going to be relatively weak compared to some of these other more stable lifts, like a bench press. What you'll also notice practically is building up your overhead press will make your bench press stronger, but it doesn't necessarily work the other way around. A big bench press does not always transfer to a strong overhead press. One, because of the stabilization we mentioned earlier, but also the muscles used. The anterior delt is used in both the bench press and the overhead press, but the overhead press will build that much more efficiently. You're also going to get some upper pec stimulus with the military press as well, which is also built in the flat bench press. So there is that carryover. And also, if you're into calisthenics like me, it pays to make sure you have a strong military press relative to your body weight to make sure your ceiling for progress isn't capped because of your strength. It's more technique. So classic compound upper body lifts have a lot of carryover into things like handstand push-ups if strength is the limiting factor and technique is on point. So in this video, we're going to go over technique, how to execute the overhead press to maximize your potential to lift the heaviest weights while also keeping the shoulder healthy. We'll go over a lot of mistakes I commonly see when performing the strict press as well. We're going to cover some variations that I like to use in my own training to help build the overhead press, and then also how to program it. So let's dive in. All right, all of your questions about technique are about to be answered. And once again, I know I've said a bunch of different names for this lift. Military press, overhead press, strict press, it's all the same. I do want to make the distinction between testing out a rep max, like if you're going for a 3 rep max, 5 rep max, 1 rep max. It's going to be a bit different than how I would prefer to train it. In any case, most of the stabilization principles will all apply. So first of all, let's talk about grip width. Now, I see a lot of people go very wide because they think it's easier. So, it's well outside shoulder width. Now, this is kind of popular because it makes your arms shorter. So it's a shorter distance to lift, but it's also much more wobbly overhead, and it puts your shoulders in a very compromised position because it pulls the scapula into the scapular plane, brings you into a bit more internal rotation at the top, and it's tough to maintain that protraction and external rotation at the bottom. So when you're lifting big weights, this isn't going to be very conducive to not only shoulder health, but stability overhead. So in the bottom position, we want to think about pulling the elbows in and pushing the ribcage back slightly. So we're maintaining this level of scapular protraction. And then as we lift, this creates a much more stable base when we go overhead because it influences that natural upward rotation that needs to happen as we go into maximum flexion. The serratus anterior is a very important scapular stabilizer as we press overhead. So how I like to find the optimal grip is a bit more nerdy, but I like to think about my forearm pronation that I have available. Because if we're limited in the ability to pronate the forearm, then in order to keep the forearm and the palm facing forward, we're going to have to manipulate the scapula and the upper arm, the humerus, to bring us into this plane. So here's what you'll do. You'll bring your elbows in front of your shoulder, palms facing your face. Turn your palms forward without too much deviation at the wrist. Just think about rotating through the elbow. Okay? See how far you can pronate. Now from here, pull your arms out until the palms are facing forward. This is going to be your grip. Okay? So it's somewhere around here for me. Maybe just outside shoulder width. So if I bring that to the bar, unrack, I'll turn around so I can show you. This is going to be my starting point. This brings me into the first technical mistake I see people make, and that is how you unrack the bar and hold it on the shoulders. So I see this in a lot of CrossFitters who are just learning how to military press because, you know, they're used to this front rack position where the elbows are high, the bar is on the fingertips. The problem with this, you have to completely throw off the path in order to strictly press it overhead. Now, they want this to carry over into their Olympic weightlifting so they can go from the front rack and jerk it up. But it's a completely different intention when you're not using that momentum. So what you want is the elbows facing the ground. So the forearm is going to be vertical. We don't want the elbows up like this because what will happen is now we're going to have to scoop, almost do like a tricep extension and a bit of an anterior delt raise to initiate this push up. So it's going to be this arc type of motion, and this just bleeds a lot of energy right off the bat. So I'll show you what I mean. We don't want to see this. Elbows high, front rack. Then we got to get the head out of the way. So there's just a lot of initial push through elbow extension that we don't need right off the bat. We want to initiate that push through shoulder flexion, and it helps to have that vertical forearm. So you're going to want the wrist a bit more in line with the forearm as well. You're going to think about driving the elbows down toward your hip bones, and then you'll initiate the press. Next mistake I see is bar path. So like we spoke about, people make this arcing motion overhead, and that just wastes a lot of energy. So we want the bar to go completely vertical. And people think that they need to go around the chin and the nose to make sure you don't smack yourself up there. We've all done it. But then they end up over-exaggerating that push outwards first. Again, we don't want this. What helps is to initiate with some thoracic extension. So I take at least a hip width stance with my feet, drive the elbows down, extend through the thoracic spine, squeeze the glutes, and then I think about pressing the bar up and back. So if you think about almost pressing up and backwards, it ends up going relatively straight. As opposed to if I just think about pressing straight up, I'm going to hit my chin. So I think about pressing backwards. So I get that thoracic extension, squeeze the ass. Okay, as long as there's no knee bend and leg drive, it's fair game. Most people are afraid of that arch and their low back getting injured. But once you practice the lift and you get used to that leg tension, the stabilization through the glutes, it's actually very safe on the low back. That thoracic extension gives you space to press overhead, and it allows the upper pec and the anterior delt to initiate that push and allow the triceps to kick in when they need to when you get toward lockout overhead. I talked about testing, and this was a big question I had because when I'm doing multiple reps in a set, the first rep is always the hardest because I typically train this from a dead stop, meaning I unrack the bar, rest it on my shoulders, walk out, and then I press. Now you'll see some lifters, especially strong men, they'll unrack the bar to about chin height, and then they'll drop down, use the stretch reflex, and then press up. So if you think about it, most other pushing exercises start from the top, they lower down and press back up. Bench press, you unrack from the top, lower down, press back up. The military press, you start from the bottom and press up, kind of like a deadlift. So it's not very natural for a pushing type motion to start from a dead stop. Same with a squat. You would unrack the bar, squat down, use some of the stretch reflex, come back out of it. Now, I think it's much cooler to train the overhead press from the dead stop. It'll probably have more carryover into your strength development. But when you want to test, take advantage of that stretch reflex because that is fair game. So how you'll unrack for your testing, squat under it a little bit, get to the chin, walk out, down, and up. Now, this weight is light. When you're actually testing, it's going to look like this. Okay? You're going to have to fight. And what's going to make or break a successful lift and a failed lift is the stability through the legs and the trunk. You need to squeeze the glutes, squeeze the quads, push the hip forward. Use as much arch as you need to. I prefer not to lean back so much, kind of like the strong men do when they're lifting 500 pounds overhead. Like, come on, 135, relax. Try to stay as upright as you can and just use the thoracic spine to initiate that initial part of the press and then start to bring the chest through. Those are the main technical cues I want to cover with the strict press. In terms of implementing this, if your military press is weak compared to your bench press, honestly, scrap the bench press as a main lift. Do some form of strict pressing twice a week. So you could still have some horizontal pressing for your accessories, of course, but your strict press should be the main lift if you really want to build it. Now, me personally, I have not been using the strict press standing. I've been training it twice a week recently, just doing it seated. So we're going to cover the seated variations. Why I like seated is because it takes away the leg drive, and you can really just focus on the shoulder development. And it also removes the ability to lean back. Because whether you're doing it with a backrest upright on an incline bench or without that, just seated on the bench, you can't lean back as much. If you don't have the backrest, you just fall back and you get punished for it. If you do have the backrest, it stops you there, so you have that external constraint. Both are very effective for building the standing strict press. And the reason for that, especially if we're doing twice a week overhead pressing, the standing strict press is just more fatiguing. You know, me personally, I want most of the fatigue coming from my skill work, like my handstand push-ups, my 90-degree push-ups. So I want my weighted pushing to be more stable. That's why I like to use the seated press. If you're not doing any other complexity through gymnastics work and body weight strength, then maybe adding the standing press once a week, and then your other session, you could do more seated barbell pressing. So let's get into the technique for the seated press. Now, most incline benches don't incline to a full 90 degrees. This is about 85 degrees. So it's important to make sure your hips aren't sliding forward in the seat, and you want to stay as upright as possible. The benefit of having the backrest is that you get to push the upper torso backwards into it, because that's naturally going to happen when you want to press overhead. But it prevents that backward translation and excessive extension at the spine. So you're going to be able to lift heavier compared to without the backrest. Pressing without the backrest, kind of a step below the standing military press in terms of stability requirements and leg contribution. You're not going to lift as heavy as you would standing, but still will be able to concentrate a lot of that force to the upper body. Like I said, you're punished if you lean back too much, because then you just fall on your back. There is going to be a lot more lower traps and upper back contribution here in order to prevent you from leaning back. So you get a lot of that shoulder flexion strength, which is why I really like this variation. Very useful for handstand push-ups as well. So how strong should your overhead press be? I personally think at a minimum, you should be able to lift your body weight for 1 rep. That should be a general standard most of you shoot for. Now, body weight does fluctuate day to day, so why not have a 5 to 10 pound buffer? So if you weigh 165 pounds like me, you should be able to press 165 pounds, maybe even 170, 175. And I think this will have tremendous carryover into any other upper body pressing that you want to go after as well. Your bench press, your weighted dips, handstand push-ups, 90-degree push-ups, planche. Stop making excuses, get your overhead press strong. So that's everything you need to know if you want to start overhead pressing with the big dogs. And next time the fellas are judging you for your mediocre bench press, just let them know that you still have DOMs from overhead pressing your mother into your bed last night. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment.